Good evening, everyone. My name is Shreya Keswani. I'm a student of grade 12 at the Millennium School, Dubai, and the host for today's session. And today we'll be talking about an alumni of St. Lawrence University of Liberal Arts. Many students aspire to go to different universities to acquire the best of education. So today our session will also be covering the application process and discuss about scholarship and many other interesting things, which would help our young adults who are soon going to be applying into different universities of the world. So today we have with us is Venika Menon, who is one of the alumni of St. Lawrence University of Liberal Arts in New York, and who was awarded with 70% scholarship. Isn't that great? Over to you, Venika.
Hi guys. So just a small correction. It's actually Sarah Lawrence, not Saint Lawrence.
Okay.
That's okay.
Okay.
That's totally fine. So yes, I've actually split this up into a few different parts. I wanted to start by talking about like why do you want to go abroad, but also like why I wanted to go abroad, just to give you some things to think about. From what I know, most of you are probably in 11th or 12th, your final leg. So it's not like, I feel like if you've already decided, but maybe this will still give you some good ideas to just ponder over, discuss with your parents, discuss with your friends, to really figure out, like, once that acceptance letter comes in, what's the right decision for you. And I'm sure all of you will get many acceptance letters. So I want to start by generally talking about selecting country. Just before we started, in fact, Suchita and I were having a small discussion about that because I wanted to check if it was even relevant. When I wanted to study abroad, there was a huge push for the United States, and that's where I ended up going. But the reasons why are, I think, rapidly changing and worth understanding, and perhaps slightly more important than they were when I went to Sarah Lawrence. And so, and I don't just mean the social political situation, but I also mean things like OTP, which was the work program that you get, which you get to do for 1 year on H1, which is the student visa. That no longer perhaps will exist, or there are questions about it existing. For example, students who graduated this year could not apply for the OTP because of the pandemic. They would not be eligible for the F1 visa, which is the visa that you get post work. So all of these things are worth considering, but also I never had any doubts. I never had any problems, for example, imagining a future back in India as well, which is where I am right now. And so for me, it wasn't such a big deal to come back, but it can be for a lot of people for a number of reasons. So just keeping that in mind and knowing that there are other countries outside of the United States is good, but also why we're selecting those countries, which kind of ties into what school you select, because all of these countries have a different way of education. Just like in India, if anyone who wants to study in India, even from abroad, typically has reasons. They prefer that, like, structured education. They prefer perhaps a student teacher dynamic where the student is essentially a lecturer. You take the notes and then you give that exam and then you pass that exam, and it's very clear as to, like, who is the top student, who is not doing so well. It's always a very hierarchical perhaps system, which I, clearly using those words, was not like, do not enjoy. But you may, and some other people might, and that's totally okay. And similarly, this also applies to other countries. The United States is a bunch of, I was looking into liberal arts colleges, so that's what I can talk about. And the United States especially has a bunch of liberal arts colleges, and what that essentially means, as I'm sure many of you already know, is that you can essentially experiment much more. It's less of a top-down system. A lot of liberal arts colleges really focus on holistic learning, is kind of the term that sometimes gets used. By that can mean a variety of things, but for Sarah Lawrence, for example, all of my classes, I want to say like less than 15 people. All of my professors knew my name. I have a lot of their phone numbers. When coronavirus hit New York really badly, I texted all of them, replies from most of them. Uh, and I hope the ones that I didn't get replies from are also doing okay. I know for a fact that for the rest of my life, they will be resources that I can count on. And I already kind of, I was hoping for that going in, and that was one of the reasons I selected Sarah Lawrence. So you're like, your reason for selecting your university should be clear to you at this point already, or should be becoming very clear to you already. At least, if not the specific university, because that's kind of hard to do, at least the general, the general kind of university you want to go to. I knew I didn't want to be in a lecture hall with like, you know, 200 other students with like a teacher's associate teaching us. That was not the experience I wanted. That's an experience that some people do not mind. I don't think anyone prefers it, but like I think that that's an experience a lot of people are okay with because of either the brand name of the school. If you go to a Harvard, that's what you're probably getting. So like, you know, depending on various factors, but these are all things to be actively considering at this point. Why are you in specific, choosing to go to that university? I knew I didn't like the Indian education system. I was never good at taking tests. I really flourished when I could like lead my own projects. And that's kind of where I landed on Sarah Lawrence. I also knew, and like other factors are kind of important too. And that has to do with location, but not just country specific location, but also like almost state specific or exact location specific. And by what I mean by that, when I was going through the process, my consultant, I also had a consultant. It was not Collegy, I'm sorry. I did not know of Collegy. Maybe it would have been in that case, but my consultant at the time had like told me very specifically, would you be okay going to a college in the middle of nowhere, where like the winter lasts for like whatever 6 months, and it's like freezing snow, and you can't leave the campus because like the next habitable city is like whatever, a full overnight train ride away or what. Like, think of where your college is also situated. I grew up in Delhi. I am used to a very vibrant city life. I knew I could not go to a rural university where the nearest city would be like a 4-hour car drive away. So those things, I know in this moment when you're like so stressed about just getting into college, seem irrelevant. But once you get there, which is, as you will find out once you do get there, is probably more important than like uh, than what you probably are thinking of right now. So like all of those considerations, no matter how small they seem right now, and you can tell yourself, oh, I'll adjust, like that's okay. But like winter, where you don't get to see the sun in months, can be really depressing. And so these are things to consider when you're thinking of college that you may not even fully um, be able to fully process right now, but worth still giving it a thought. And then your reasons should be very clear, just like my reasons were kind of clear, but also the reasons you don't pick a place I think are equally important. So for example, I did not want to go to NYU, for example, which was in the city. uh, Sarah Lawrence is like, it's a half-an-hour train ride into the city, but it's a train ride like all professionals take. So that train is very regular. It runs all the time. It runs like, you know, at all times of night. That worked for me. But at the same time, I had an option of applying to NYU. The reason I didn't, because I also knew that New York is not New Delhi. It is a much more high intensity, highly stimulating city. I was fairly certain that that kind of lifestyle change, also a very expensive city, being slightly outside of the city could also mean that I wasn't paying New York prices for like everyday things like food, like groceries, like my living expenses. And so to also know, okay, this is something that I don't want in the long run, also pretty helpful. So those are like, you must know the reasons why you're eventually going to select the college you're going to select. That doesn't mean you don't apply to a whole range of colleges, but just something to keep in mind even during your application process. So at least you can strike out schools, or you can prioritize certain schools over others. Um, I also like scholarship. So the reason I chose to go to the US was like in 10th grade, I went to Columbia University for a program. I really enjoyed it. I got to sit in on a few classes, and I realized how different the teaching style was. Just like the beautiful universities, like they really looked like places of learning in like the very traditional sense when you close your eyes and imagine a university. And so like that really fascinated me. But like the minute I got back home, I was very clear that I could not afford it. And so I knew that scholarships would be a big part of my effort if I wanted to go to the United States. And that conversation with my mother was very clear. She was like, hey, if we can find a way to pay for it, and that way would probably only be scholarships because no one is dying and leaving you a lot of money, we can figure it out. I'm a single parent child. So that's the context. Uh, and I knew for a fact, for example, that Columbia would have probably accepted my application and I might have gotten in, but that doesn't mean I would have been a scholarship holding student at Columbia. So also those kinds of like knowing where you will fall just because you can get in, like if scholarships are your goal, just because you can get into something doesn't mean that you're going to be eligible for a scholarship. Uh, so moving on, those were the broad reasons for applying, like when you're thinking of applying to universities, like what you should probably be thinking of. Moving on to the application, the bad reasons are like my parents want me to go to a foreign university, my friends are all going to foreign universities, my like I think like frat life or like living abroad would be cool. These are all kind of not great reasons. Again, if you can afford it, like I guess do whatever, but honestly, like I think that there are better ways to spend those 4 years in a way that like after those 4 years you can feel very secure and very proud of what you've accomplished in the previous 4 years. Um, let's talk about the application process and preparedness. So that's the next part. Uh, I wrote 17 versions of my main Common App essay. If you're applying to the US, the Common App is what you will need to fill out essentially. And I wrote 17 versions of that essay. The first version I don't think has a single word that is the same as the 17th version. So it went through a lot of changes. It was very hard, but your first version will never work. And that stands for almost, it is a hard process. Doing this process, if your friends are, especially if your friends are not doing this process, it is a hard process. I know most of you are already in the flow of this process, so you already know this, but know that like, it's probably worth it once you do, like, you know, really just grit your teeth into it. Um, I researched schools like crazy. And what I mean by that, I think the reasons that my application perhaps stood out, which caused me to get the scholarship, which caused me to get into a great school. Sarah Lawrence is a very small school, but like our alumni are everywhere. We're very good. I don't know, it's weird to brag about your own school. Go look it up. But like, it's a small school, but it's a very well-reputed school, especially in the US, especially in New York, especially in the kinds of fields. We're not known for being doctors or engineers, but even in those fields, like, for example, genetic counseling, I believe like 70% of the field of genetic counseling in the US is Sarah Lawrence grads, because we had one of the first genetic counseling programs in the country. And so small things like that were a great school. But the reason that great school decided to give me money was because for every application I wrote, I had not only gone through their website several times, but also their newsletters. That like it, you have to convince the school that you will be a great fit and that not having you on campus will be worse. And it's honestly a PR exercise. It's almost like building a brand, but the brand is you. So you need to be very consistent about what your brand is. You need to be very specific about what your brand is, and you need to be very sure that your brand fits the school's brand. Um, and that means being intimately familiar with all of the clubs that the school has. Which clubs would you want to join? What club, like look at their course catalogs, see which courses that they've offered in previous years that you perhaps would be interested in. Which professors, and like what are the professors doing at that school, and what professors would you be interested in working with? What activities outside of school, like why being in my case, why being so close to New York would be useful for internships, for other like co-curricular activities, extracurricular activities. So that research, I think in my application really stood out. And outside of that research, the other thing that I think I did really right outside of the general things are definitely try and interview with someone, and not just a student interview. A lot of colleges have offer student interviews, and I have been a student interviewer. I know that we are under a lot of pressure to write the interviews, and if we are not having a great day, like it's like interview with the college accept like admissions team if you can really push for that. They may not easily give it to you, but ask to do that, and even like write to a professor there, ask them questions, and then mention that in your interview, like really show, almost make them feel like they are the only ones you're looking at. And that takes time and effort, there's no denying that. It was a little bit of an easier task for me because if you're, again, these are very US specific things. I'm sorry, the people who are going to other countries, maybe it's a similar system, I don't know fully, to be honest. But um, what was I saying? I forgot what I was saying. I'm very sorry. God damn it. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna move on because I can't remember. But basically, like, do your research. Oh, I had applied early decision, which is one of the very specific, again US centric things, which essentially means that I had already decided that if I get into Sarah Lawrence and get the scholarship I need, I will be going there. And that's you can still apply to other colleges on the college application form, but you kind of sign a contract saying that if your financial requirements are met, you will be going to the US. Something to consider about the US again, I'm sorry, I'm talking about the US again in specific, is that, and I think this is actually true for most colleges in most countries, so may not be as US specific, I just don't have the data for other countries, is that about 23% of US students currently in the United States are international students, and they overwhelmingly pay the full tuition. And so when the colleges are thinking of who they want to admit, international students are actually on the bottom of the list of who they want to give scholarships to. The expectation is that state students will get certain discounts, the people who live in the specific state that the college is in, then students in the same countries also get a lot of aid and like federal level discounts from the federal government, from certain scholarships reserved for American students. And then there is almost very rarely specific scholarships that are meant for international students, but even outside of that, schools aren't, international students are the ones who pay the deficit to help US students get into like be able to pay for their schools. And so it is not easy. And when I was applying, my counselor had in fact told me that it is highly unlikely that I would get a scholarship. And part of my scholarship was actually need-based aid. And so that is also a factor that like you cannot control. But it's good to know there are need sensitive schools, there are schools that are need blind, all of these terms, please look up, please discuss with your counselors, or maybe you're already familiar with these terms, but worth looking into. Sarah Lawrence was a need sensitive school, so it was a slightly easier path. I did not have to actually apply specifically for a scholarship or for my need-based aid. And yes, also the other part of the application process is also figuring out your shortcomings. So I am not a good test taker, and the SATs were not a great time for me. In both of them, I got nervous. I took them twice. In both of them, I got very nervous. I hate math. Actually, I don't hate math. Doing math under pressure is what I hate. Not a fun time. Did not get the best score. But I already, before going into it, I already knew I was not going to get a good score. So my whole pitch was that, like, yeah, math is not my strong suit, but like, look at all of these other strong suits that I have, and that I don't, in fact, have a problem with academics. And that I was able to show that in my school academics essentially. But also, for example, what that meant for me, and perhaps some of you go to similar schools, is where like in 11th grade or even in 12th grade till you actually give your boards, they mark you very harshly. And perhaps your average at your school level is say between 70 and 85, and like most students are falling somewhere there unless you're like a really smart kid. Like that was kind of a trend in Amity. No matter how much you, I went to Amity International Noida, no matter how well you thought you did, you still got somewhere between like a 75 and a 85. But my school was very good about putting that uh, in their school profile, where they describe what kind of school it is, and they specifically spelled out that they were in fact marking us more harshly during 11th and 12th to be able to make up, like to prepare us better for the final board exam. Not every school will have that policy, not every school will say that policy out loud, but there are like, think of the things that someone who is looking at your application from the outside would mark and be like suspicious of, or would think are minuses, and try to tackle them preemptively. Um, the yeah, and the other step that I would highly recommend is like, if you can figure out what you're standing in, not just into, a lot of people submit like I'm X, like I'm the X percentile in my class, I'm the top 5 in 40 people. If you can figure out what you are in the 400 people class that you're in, my school had a ranking sheet like that, so it helped. That actually sometimes sounds more impressive. Being 5 in 40 is fine, but like if you can be the 40th in 400, that's kind of quite impressive. And so if you can figure something like, see all the metrics that you can use and figure out the ones that you look best in, because there is also a space constraint. No one is going to read 50 pages about you. And yeah, just be again, it's a PR exercise. Be prepared for defending your shortcomings and have a lot of positives. uh, the more, as someone who was a student interviewer, I got to hear a lot from uh, potential students, incoming students. And once you do that, you realize everyone's application kind of sounds the same, in the sense that there are very few students who say are in the bottom 20% of their class applying to Harvard, or like applying to the best universities. And so everyone that's applying is kind of near each other, and the thing that gets you ahead is only 1 or 2% of the difference between the person who actually gets in, who gets scholarship. Like the margin is very, very thin. Knowing that, uh, I would also, if you have friends going, your counselors, figure out like what, again, it's a branding exercise. So really try and figure out what makes you stand apart. When I was going to college, for example, MUNs were not that common at that point. Now I know almost all of my younger cousins, my mom's friends' children, all of them do MUNs. It perhaps is just not as impressive as when I did it, even though it's the same activity. And so to know like, okay, these are like things that every student probably says, every good student, every student in my bracket already says, and how to stand apart even in that. Like, are there things, even if you're doing MUNs, I just use that as an example, are there things about what you are doing at MUNs that really make you stand out? For example, I went to Germany and I chaired a committee. That was kind of impressive. I went to the US and I won like the best delegate, and it was at like the ceremony, the award ceremony was held at the UN. That was kind of impressive. And so to figure out like what are the kind of impressive things specifically about you, not that no one else has done that, or not that other applicants aren't doing similarly impressive things, but just you saying that you are doing X, I just don't think is enough if you are looking for that scholarship kind of thing. And lastly, I want to say like, it, if your scholarship is what you need to go to school, then it's very important. But otherwise, you will get admission somewhere. You will still have a lovely time. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. I mean that in the sense that like, college is great, and when you're in it, it's like when you're trying to get in, it feels like the be all and all. My mother flunked, like she dropped out of college because she like didn't do well on her exams, and she had to reapply, and she was fine. And she turned out to be totally okay. I did not drop out of college. I also turned out to be, I think, okay. And so all I mean to say is like it will be okay either way. And so like just it's okay. Like this getting into college is actually not the hard part. Once you get to college is frankly much harder. And so yeah, that's like I know I'm like already pushing the time limit, but lastly, I just want to say like yeah, once you get to college is where you truly need to shine, because no one will care, like no one after you get into college will ask you about how you got into college unless you're doing a program where you're talking to students. But a lot of people will ask you what you did at college, at least for the first like few years after you graduate. And so figuring that out, and you can only figure so much out beforehand, but having some sort of a game plan and also being very adaptable. I did not graduate with the degree that I went in to do, for example. And I did many other things that I did not, in fact, intend to do that worked out pretty well. And so just, thinking about what your time at college will actually look like, and how just mentally preparing for how tough it will also be is the last thing that I want to say. Like, it doesn't get easier. I know you think, like, I wish I could tell you that it did, but it doesn't. Once you're at college, it's actually harder. I'm sorry. Life sucks. Coronavirus. So I think I'm done.
Yeah, I know it is indeed like a great, and I think the people who are really going to watch this webinar, they're definitely going to know that to all the people who are applying to US, UK, wherever in the world, the stress is the same. You just have to manage it, and there's a lot of things that goes into it: hard work, efforts, and so now there is this Q&A session, which we had last webinar as well. So my first question would be that nowadays, like children, mostly students prefer to go to these Ivy universities in US specifically, like Harvard, like because they have a lot of name. So what, like as an advice, as you've graduated from college, what would you like, what do you would advise to the kids, that is their decision of going to Ivy correct, or should they like give their options even to universities which are not really popular because of their name, but have a good education, and like where you can understand and give, and will be given personal attention. So do you think, what advice would you give to the children who will be like, who are only aiming for Ivy universities?
So I think it really depends on why you want to go to an Ivy, right? Like, again, Columbia, if I could have gotten in with a scholarship, probably would have gone to Columbia. But as someone who went to Sarah Lawrence, we in fact have a 5-2 program if you specifically study sciences, and sorry, 3-2 program if you specifically study sciences. And what that means is 3 years you do at Sarah Lawrence and 2 years you do at Columbia, and it's an automatic transfer. They have a very, very good relationship with us. I don't want to speak like about the future, but I can say with a high degree of certainty, because the number of my friends who've gotten to Columbia, that there is a high likelihood that if I was to now apply to Columbia, I would in fact be eligible for scholarship for a master's program, and I would in fact be able to attend. Like, admission and scholarship would no longer be the hurdle. So, and if you, I also have friends who, I have a friend who went to MIT, which is Ivy level university. And he was already very, very, very smart in a very different way than I was. And that decision worked out well for him. I also knew that I didn't want to be in a space where I like, even if I got in, there's like a levels of smartness. I was at the bottom level of smartness and everyone was much higher. Like, Harvard has always felt like one of those universities that if I did get in, even by luck, like I would be the dumbest person there, which is probably not true. But like, I would also, I know for a fact that I'm not the smartest person in a Harvard classroom. And so like, do I want to be in a space where everyone is smarter than me? That's a lot of pressure. I personally do not. And they're also very expensive. Again, like if cost is a concern for you, like
Yeah.
maybe don't look at them. Um, but outside of that, like they're great universities in many ways. Not all of their programs are good. One, like because you do say law from Harvard Law, actually Yale Law is considered better than Harvard Law. But like if you do Yale Law, Yale Law is not the same as like a Harvard like fishery program. I don't know what the best fishery program in the country is, but for like genealogy is a very good example. Sarah Lawrence, in fact, does have the best genealogy program in all of the US. And so perhaps not the best named school, but a better program. And so figuring out these finer details, especially once you get to the US, that distinction of like, oh, this is the Ivy level versus this is a regular school gets
Hmm.
much more blurry. People care, like, because they are actually there. Like if you go to Massachusetts and you're like, oh, I'm a Harvard student, they don't care because Harvard is right there. Everyone's a Harvard student. And so that distinction is much less when you're physically there versus when you're here. And I get it; those are impressive names, and if you can do it, and if you think you'll be able to survive that kind of intensity, and you don't mind the negatives of going to which includes like price and big classrooms and the professor probably not knowing your name, like that's fine. You should do it, but there are many other reasons to look at other schools.
Okay. So my next question would be that what advice would you give to the students who have been rejected by many universities, like who like their dream university specifically? What advice would you give to them? Like because since you're graduated, it would like you know how it feels. Maybe you didn't get rejected. I don't really don't know about that, but like there's always like a student has this dream universities and they want to like get into there, and they face that rejection. So how should they deal with it? If you have any idea and you want to comment on it, it would be great.
Yeah. So because I applied early decision, which is again a very US specific thing, once I got into Sarah Lawrence, I didn't actually end up completing a lot of the other applications even. So I didn't actually have to receive any rejection letters because early decision students get to
Okay.
know much further in advance. But I definitely would have. Like I was applying to 12 schools. Out of 12 schools, I am sure someone would have rejected me. Like that is a fact. I'm not such a good student. I can tell you that myself. And I think just talking about rejection in life in general as someone, especially after graduating last 2 years ago at this point, faced a lot of rejection in a lot of jobs because already being an international student, when I was working in New York, it was hard to get that job. It hurts. Like there's no, there was specifically, for example, one job where I interviewed with 6 different people and I was so sure I will get it. And they made me wait a month to hear back from them. And eventually they were like, we went with some other candidate. And it can feel similarly because you're writing all of these essays, you're interviewing with all of these people,
Yeah.
you've done your research. You can like almost when you close your eyes, you can imagine the campus, you can imagine yourself being there. Uh, just know that there's nothing you can do about it, and the only way to move forward is forward. And once you get to that place, like once I got that a different job, I worked in New York for a year. I didn't think back every day being like, oh, I wish if I was there, things would like if that job had worked out, it would have been different. Like you have a certain amount of time, like between your 12th and getting to college, just focus on getting into some college that is still on your I like list. Like don't have a dream school because if you don't get in, that'll hurt a lot. Or like even if you have a dream school, definitely have a dream backup school.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So, did you face like since you were going from India to like US, the atmosphere and everything? Do you think that did you face any kind of pressure, any kind of like you felt some like the lifestyle over there, something really new? So, like, how did you feel being there? Then, like I mean, you went to Columbia, or I think we should consider the Columbia one first, and then the university that you went into, or like the experience was different, or like the same experience but the lifestyle, the way they do things, did it like fascinate you, or did you feel like in a lot of things that India was a little better, like any contrast and limitations, advantages, if you could share with us?
Yeah, I think I think things are different there. Like it's a whole different country. That's a whole, like a few continents away, in fact. And they can be different for a variety of reasons. For example, the first Colombia, I was there for a week. Like it was a week program for a week, so it wasn't like I experienced a lot from it. So when I went to Sarah Lawrence, for example, we had this. All freshmen have to take this course where they get a don, and that don is basically um, our professor mentor for the rest of the 4 years that we are there, unless we decide to change in the middle. And my Don and I are still like, we text. It's great. He's like this old Jewish man who like barely understands technology, and like
Wow.
made us read really thick books that like ultimately his class was the most boring, but I can't tell him that kind of person. But like I very quickly understood. I didn't know. I studied a CBSE system, in case any, like, just to clarify what I'm going to say. I didn't know how to write papers, like long papers, in a MLA or like a AP format. I just didn't know how to write papers. I didn't know how to do citations. All the papers that we ever wrote for school were like almost handwritten, or even if they were printed, we didn't really need a format as long as they were legible and like spellings were correct. So I had no idea how to structure papers, and all our assignments were papers. And I could see that the like my writing style and my writing quality just wasn't the same. And my Don could tell that as well. And so at one of our bi-weekly meetings, he was like, what's happening? Like, clearly you're smart, you're like, your paper makes sense, but like, why is it written like this? Essentially, that's what he said. And that's something I had to adjust to. And he worked with me on that. But again, I was fortunate to go to a college where my professor could pick up that I wasn't doing well and then help me
Yeah.
adjust. But perhaps you will have to do that on your own. And so just being prepared that it's a completely different education system. The other things are like small things like racism. Growing up in India, you're the dominant, or if you're Hindu, I guess I should say, if you're Hindu, you're the dominant religion. You're the one, in fact, oppressing people. And so when you go abroad, suddenly you are not that. You don't. Everyone looks different from you. You have never been. America, in specific, is a very like many people from all over the world. I had never been in an environment like that. And so when I was facing racism, I did not have words to express what was happening. And so I would just feel bad and not know why I was feeling bad. And thankfully I had friends, and I like took classes about it, and it really helped, who like really helped me walk through my experiences and like start putting experiences I was having into words and be able to express myself, defend myself, etc. But that was really hard. There are definitely good things about the Indian, like I would have just saved a lot, even with the scholarships. I would have just saved a lot of money if I had just stayed
Money. Yeah.
here. And money and like emotional comfort. There was a class after not taking biology at all from 10th grade onwards. Suddenly, in my second year of school, I decided I should take a biology class. I don't know why. It's like I had no idea why I thought that was a good idea. But at Sarah Lawrence, I could do that. So I was like, I'm going to take a biology class, a college level biology class. And I did not do well in that class. But like, again, my professors were great. They were able to like see that I got the extra time I needed. So like, you will make mistakes either way. It'll be like, no matter which part of the world you go, maybe it'll be like, thankfully I made friends really early on, but I had a different person that I had met at orientation who was also Indian, who several times during freshman year came to my room and just cried because she felt like she didn't fit in, just like in a social sense. And so there could be several reasons why it will be different. It will for sure be different. There's no way to guess why it'll be different specifically for you. So like,
Yeah.
just hope and pray that you have good friends, that or like your systems back home is supportive, or that you can take the time off, or that your professors are understanding. Some combination of these factors will get you through it, but it will be tough either way. It will be different. If not tough, it will at least be different.
Yeah, I agree to that, and I think the audience will be watching, which is probably the people who will be applying soon. They should be probably knowing it, and they should be mentally prepared to like go and like get adjusted to the worst situation possible. So yeah, and I think that would be the end of all the questions. But actually this thing just came up to my mind. I wanted to ask that like you said that you chose a place which had like 6 months, had like a lot of winters. So like how did you adapt to such an environment where like staying in Delhi and then moving to a place where you'll not see like 6 months of like almost no sunlight, and you're in the winters, and plus new environment, like new college, new everything, and then this on the top. So how did you like adopt to that thing specifically with the
So
climatic conditions, I would say?
So New York definitely has a much more severe winter than I was ever used to in New Delhi. Massachusetts, for example, has a worse, much worse. Like when I would complain to my Massachusetts friends about New York winters, they'd be like, "What are you talking about? I don't get it." And so, depending on the place, like it can be really, really bad. New York at least has 4 months that are really bad. Massachusetts has more like six. Like again, depends. And One, our mental health services were really good. It is something I frequented. They
Oh,
had this light therapy room that was great. They specifically seasonal depression is what they call it. And as someone who got diagnosed with actual depression, not just seasonal depression, second year of college at college, which was great fun, I like that was a room I was very comfortable going to. But outside of that, I think like there's nothing you can do. Like if the sun
yeah,
isn't coming out, like you can't do anything. You just have to kind of keep going, knowing that like you have other responsibilities. And even if you feel like really not great, again, hopefully you have a support like hopefully you have a support system outside of the sun that will help you get through it. And again, nothing you like, but knowing that that is a possibility. Like if I uh, just small things like buying the right coats. And I know this sounds silly, but like when I went to the US, my I have some family in the US, and they gave me their children's coats, and their children have children now. So their children are very old. Their coats were really old and old fashioned. I did not want to wear the clothes that they gave me. And so I know that that sounds kind of silly, but like when you're like a freshman, you want to feel cool. You want to not look like the weirdo wearing like the 1960s coat. Like and so like being able to have even just that much of a discussion with my mom, being like, hey, I've saved up enough at school, I'm in fact going to buy myself a coat. I also worked like throughout my college, I worked 3 jobs, and so I like that was outside of my tuition. My mother didn't have to fund anything for me. And so being like even those small adjustments of no longer having to wear this really clearly old looking hand me down coat helps. And knowing that those things are going to help and not neglecting those aspects, whether that means like the lights in your room. Colleges have awful, the general lighting in colleges are really awful in your dorms, especially if you're staying in a dorm. Just knowing that perhaps I'm going to go and buy a IKEA lamp with a yellow light, which will like kind of make me feel like it's warm and sunny. Just those small touches can make a really big difference, but you have to
oh,
be
okay.
in tune with yourself to know that that's what's going to help, because like you can't bring the sun out.
Yeah, I know that. Okay, so that was a question that I personally wanted to ask as well. That would be the end. Thank you, Venica, for participating in the College
Thank
webinar
you.
series, and your information has definitely enlightened our audience. I can bet that. And thank you, audience, for attending, and we'll soon be attending the webinar. And please stay tuned for our upcoming webinars. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.